There are moments in life when the surface tells one story, but the truth lies buried deep, hidden in the folds of plain clothes, tucked behind weary eyes, concealed in silence. That truth, like gold beneath soil, waits for only the discerning to uncover. Victor Hayes understood this better than most. On a brisk autumn morning, Victor stood outside a weather-beaten diner along a quiet suburban highway. His worn-out flannel shirt hung loosely from his frame, its elbows patched, threads fraying. His jeans were faded, the denim thinning at the knees, and his work boots bore the tired scuffs of 100 dusty roads. He could have been mistaken for an old mechanic, the kind who lived paycheck to paycheck, working odd jobs to keep the lights on. But what no one would guess, not from the rust-stained cuffs of his sleeves, nor from the dented pickup truck parked behind him, was that Victor Hayes was one of the most powerful business magnates in the state. A man whose name graced the covers of Forbes twice, whose signature could sway entire markets. Yet here he was, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, seated on a rickety bench outside a diner that smelled faintly of bacon grease and yesterday's hash browns. The world passed by without a second glance, and Victor preferred it that way. He watched the morning sun climb slowly over the horizon, its amber light spilling across the sleepy streets. A few school buses rattled past, their windows streaked with fog, carrying kids in hoodies and varsity jackets. Music thumped faintly from one bus as it groaned up the hill, disappearing into the sprawl of neat lawns and brick houses. Victor let out a breath, fogging the rim of his mug. The air was sharp, biting, the kind that nipped at your ears and made you shove your hands deeper into your pockets. Yet he felt no discomfort. After decades of boardrooms, glossy suits, and hollow compliments, this rough-edged simplicity was his refuge. He leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes for a moment, and let the breeze carry him back to a time when everything he owned fit into a single duffel bag. A time before wealth, before respect, before the endless sea of zeros in his bank account. Back when he was just a boy in threadbare sneakers, running errands for a man who never bothered to learn his name. His lips curled into a faint smile, half nostalgia, half irony. If only the world knew. But the world didn't, and Victor intended to keep it that way. The low growl of a sports car engine snapped him from his thoughts. He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of a sleek, obsidian-black Lamborghini gliding to a stop across the street. Its doors swung upward like the wings of a dark bird, and out spilled laughter, loud, carefree, tinged with arrogance. For teenagers emerged, each one polished like a showroom display. Designer jackets, sparkling sneakers, haircuts that looked like they cost more than Victor's boots. They sauntered toward the diner with the casual swagger of kids who believed the world bent for their whims. Victor's gaze lingered, not with disdain, but with quiet curiosity. He had seen their kind before, entitled, insulated, so far removed from the grit of real struggle that they mistook luxury for life itself. He wondered how far they would go before reality humbled them. As the group drew closer, one boy, tall, lean, his hoodie splashed with a brand name in bold white letters, threw a glance toward Victor. It wasn't the curious glance you give a stranger. No, this one was different. It was the glance that sizes, measures, and dismisses all in a heartbeat. The boy smirked, nudged his friend, then another chuckle, louder this time. The others joined in, eyes darting toward Victor's flannel, his scuffed boots, his pickup truck squatting lopsided by the curb like an old mutt among thoroughbreds. Victor heard every note of their laughter, each sound sharp and cutting, though he didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for his coffee again, taking a slow sip, his expression unreadable, like a stone unshaken by the tide. Inside him, however, something stirred. Not anger, not humiliation, but a thought. A quiet, simmering thought that spread through him like a ripple on still water. They think they know wealth. They think they know power. But what will they do when their mirror shatters? When the world they built on appearances crumbles at their feet? Victor set down the mug, rose to his feet, and brushed the dust from his jeans. His reflection flickered in the diner's window, a poor man by every visible measure. But behind those tired eyes blazed something the teenagers couldn't begin to comprehend. By the time the Lamborghini's engine roared again, setting the street trembling, Victor Hayes had already made a decision. A decision that would change those kids' lives forever. The diner bell jingled as the teenagers strutted inside like they owned the place. Their laughter spilled across the room, sharp and careless, drawing glances from the older patrons hunched over plates of pancakes and steaming coffee. Victor stepped in a few moments later, moving with the quiet ease of a man who had nothing to prove. He chose a corner booth, one arm draped over the backrest, the other clutching a worn menu. From his seat, he watched them. 4 of them, maybe 17 or 18, all draped in the kind of clothes that screamed money without having to speak. The leader, tall, dark-haired, with a diamond stud winking in his ear, slid into a booth at the center of the diner. His name, Victor would learn later, was Brandon Pierce. Brandon's voice carried across the room, effortlessly commanding attention. "Man, did you see the look on his face? That old guy out there? Thought he was invisible, sitting there with his Salvation Army jacket and those beat-up boots." The others laughed, a chorus of shallow amusement. One of the girls, petite with glossy auburn curls and nails sharp as glass, leaned in, smirking. "You mean Grandpa Flannel?" "Yeah, I thought he was going to ask us for spare change or something." Victor heard every word. He didn't react. Instead, he flipped his menu open as though studying the breakfast specials, though his eyes barely scanned the page. His mind, sharp as ever, absorbed every tone, every careless jab, filing them away in silence. The waitress, a tired woman with streaks of grey in her ponytail, glided over to the teen's table with a pad in hand. "What'll it be today?" Brandon grinned, tossing his car keys in the air and catching them with a practiced flick. The keys glinted beneath the fluorescent lights, the Lamborghini logo glaring like a badge of honor. Yeah," Brandon drawled, loud enough for Victor to hear. "We'll take 4 cappuccinos. Extra foam. And make it quick, okay? We've got places to be." The waitress gave a tight smile, jotting down the order without comment. She'd seen kids like this before, flash without substance. Victor's gaze shifted to the window, where the Lamborghini still gleamed like a black panther crouched at the curb. He could almost hear the teens' thoughts, the silent script of superiority playing behind their eyes. "Old man with a rust bucket versus us with the V12 beast outside. Case closed." When his coffee arrived, Victor offered the waitress a polite nod, slipping a generous tip under the saucer before lifting the cup to his lips. The aroma curled upward, warm and grounding. Across the room, Brandon's voice spiked again. "Yo, check this out." He angled his phone so the others could see. On the screen, a photo of Victor's pickup truck sat under a harsh filter, the caption in bold. #throwbackvibes #rustlife. The teens roared with laughter, the sound grating against the hum of morning chatter. Brandon smirked, thumbs flying as he added, "Let's make this viral. Who even drives that thing anymore? Bet it runs on duct tape and prayers." Another boy chimed in, his hoodie zipped halfway up, revealing a gold chain gleaming at his throat. "Bro, that thing probably has a cassette player. Classic." Victor lowered his cup slowly, setting it back in its saucer with a soft clink. His reflection wavered in the coffee's surface. Lined face, grey at the temples, clothes worn thin. To them, he was invisible. Or worse, a joke. He let the sting settle, not because it hurt, but because it reminded him of something. Of a time when he had been the one on the outside looking in. When the world measured him by the dust on his boots and the holes in his pockets. Back then, he'd vowed that if he ever climbed out of the pit, he would never forget how easy it was for people to judge what they didn't understand. And here they were, 4 kids, blinded by chrome and leather, drunk on the illusion of invincibility. Victor's lips curved into the faintest smile. Not of amusement, but of intent. He stood, adjusting the cuff of his flannel shirt, and walked toward their booth. His boots made soft thuds against the tiled floor, each step quiet, yet heavy with purpose. The teens noticed him when his shadow fell across their table. Brandon looked up first, brows arching with casual arrogance. "Can we help you, old man?" he said, the words slick with mockery. Victor's eyes met his, calm, steady, the color of storm clouds before rain. For a long beat, he said nothing. Then his voice came, low and even, carrying a weight the teens didn't recognize yet. "No," Victor replied, "but I might be able to help you." The table fell silent for half a second before laughter erupted again, sharp and scornful. Brandon leaned back, crossing his arms. "Oh yeah? And what could you possibly help us with? Fashion tips? Or maybe a GoFundMe for a new truck?" The others snickered, phones already out, ready to capture the showdown for their followers. Victor's expression didn't change. He simply tilted his head, studying Brandon as if measuring not his height, but the hollowness behind his smirk. "Not quite," Victor said softly. "I was thinking an opportunity. One that could teach you more than those shiny keys ever will." Brandon blinked, thrown off for just a second before his grin snapped back into place. "An opportunity? What are you, some kind of motivational speaker?" Victor's lips twitched. Not a smile, not yet. "No, Just a man who knows what happens when arrogance blinds you. I've seen where that road ends. He paused, letting the words sink in. Meet me this afternoon. If you've got the guts. Brandon stared, the challenge hanging between them like a blade. Then he chuckled, slow and mocking. This ought to be good. Fine, old man. Where to? Victor slid a small card onto the table. Plain white. Just an address, written in neat black ink. 3 o'clock, he said, his voice quiet but final. Don't be late. Then, without waiting for a response, Victor turned and walked out. The diner door swung shut behind him, the bell chiming faintly as the Lamborghini boys watched his faded flannel vanish into daylight. None of them knew it yet, but they'd just stepped onto a path that would change everything they thought they knew about power, pride, and what it truly means to be rich. The Lamborghini roared to life like a predator freed from its cage. Brandon gripped the wheel with one hand, phone in the other, as the black beast surged onto the open road. Beside him, the others lounged in leather seats, laughter bouncing off the tinted glass like ricocheting bullets. Did you guys see his face? Brandon chuckled, angling his phone toward himself. Yo, say what's up to my followers. We just met the king of thrift stores. The screen lit up with their grins as Brandon hit record. His voice dipped into a mocking tone. Some old dude just rolled up on us in a truck straight out of Jurassic Park. Tried to give us a life lesson. Can you believe that? Like, bro, check your wardrobe before you start preaching. The girl with the auburn curls, Kylie, leaned into the frame, flashing a smirk. Hashtag grandpa goals, she chirped, puckering her lips before snapping a selfie with Victor's rusty pickup in the blurred background. Another boy, Jordan, stocky with a grin sharp as broken glass, added, Yo, maybe he's one of those guys who lives in a cabin and writes inspirational quotes on Facebook. The car exploded with laughter again, filling the sleek interior with arrogance, so thick it almost had weight. Brandon's fingers flew over his screen, slicing captions into his video. When Grandpa tries to teach you life lessons, face with tears of joy. Hashtag Rustlife, hashtag stay in your lane, hashtag VIP only. Within minutes, the post hit his story. Notifications poured in. Hearts, laughing emojis, comments stacked like dominoes. Bruh, he probably sells scrap metal for gas money. Old school vibes, rolling on the floor laughing. Bet he smells like motor oil and regret. Each ding of approval stoked Brandon's ego higher. The boy thrived on attention, his confidence feeding on likes like oxygen. The car's cabin pulsed with music, bass thumping through the seats as they sped past manicured lawns and glass storefronts gleaming in the late morning sun. Where's that card he gave you? Kylie asked, twirling a strand of hair around her manicured finger. Brandon fished it from the console and waved it between two fingers like a winning lottery ticket. The address was handwritten, black ink on crisp white stock, stark and oddly formal. No logo, no name, just a location. This guy's seriously living in the Stone Age, Brandon scoffed. Who even writes addresses anymore? Ever heard of Google Maps, Grandpa? The others laughed again, but something, just for a split second, flickered in Brandon's mind. A question, a sliver of curiosity. Who even carries cards like this? And what's out there at that address? He shoved the thought aside, cranking up the volume as the Lamborghini devoured another stretch of asphalt. We'll go, he declared, smirking into the rearview. Why not? Could be fun. Maybe he's gonna try to sell us his mixtape or something. Or his truck, Jordan snorted. $10 says he calls it a classic. Kylie rolled her eyes, then tapped her phone's screen furiously. I'm already live, guys. Our fans are loving this. She held up her phone so they could see the flood of comments. Look, someone just said, bet that old man doesn't even own a credit card. Brandon grinned, soaking in the digital applause. But under the glow of the screen, the card in his other hand felt heavier than paper should. As the Lamborghini glided through the city, Brandon tossed the card onto the dashboard without another thought. Sunlight spilled across its surface, making the black ink gleam faintly, an unspoken promise hanging in the warm air. This wasn't going to end the way they thought. Later that day, the video detonated across Brandon's feed like a spark in dry grass. By noon, his post had racked up over 18,000 views. Comments snowballed into a storm of ridicule aimed squarely at Victor Hayes, the stranger in flannel, immortalized in a blurry snapshot outside a dingy diner. Bro looks like he time-traveled from the Great Depression. Somebody get this man a GoFundMe. Imagine owning a truck like that in 2025 Skull Dot. Victor's photo became a meme within hours, plastered with captions like when life gives you lemons, but no lumbo. Brandon soaked in every laugh, every emoji, his confidence towering higher than the skyscrapers flashing past his car window. And yet, when night draped its velvet cloak over the city, and Brandon finally stretched out on his king-sized bed beneath a ceiling studded with LED stars, the laughter replayed in his head like an echo that wouldn't fade. Not the laughter online, the real laughter, his own, sharp and careless. For reasons he couldn't name, the memory of that man's eyes, storm grey and steady as stone, kept slicing through the haze of his triumph. Calm, unshaken, carrying something that no meme could mock. Something he didn't understand. What none of them knew, what no one scrolling through their screens could guess, was that the man they called Grandpa Flannel was worth more than all their trust funds combined. And by the time tomorrow's sun set, they'd wish they had never laughed at him at all. Because Victor Hayes wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The sun dipped low over the horizon, bleeding orange and crimson across the skyline like a masterpiece in fire and glass. Long shadows sprawled across the road as Brandon eased the Lamborghini to a stop in front of the address on the plain white card. The others leaned forward, necks craning, expecting something different. Something laughable. But what they saw made Brandon's smirk widen into a full-blown grin. "This is it," he said, killing the engine with a lazy flick of his wrist. The cars perfaded, leaving only the whisper of a cool evening breeze. In front of them stood a wrought iron gate, its black paint chipped and curling like old bark. Beyond the bars loomed a cracked asphalt driveway choked with weeds, snaking toward a cluster of low buildings barely visible in the distance. One of the boys let out a bark of laughter. "Bro, what is this? A junkyard?" Kylie wrinkled her nose, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "EW, does anyone else smell that? Like oil and dust?" Brandon laughed, leaning an elbow against the steering wheel. Guess Grandpa wasn't lying about that opportunity. Bet it's a gig picking up scrap metal. Another burst of laughter shook the car. Jordan slapped his thigh. "Yo, imagine us, dressed like this, hauling trash for gas money. My followers would lose it." "Relax," Brandon said, swinging his door open. "We're just here to see what kind of circus this guy's running. Then we bounce." They piled out, shoes crunching over gravel as they approached the gate. A weathered sign hung crookedly from one hinge. "Hayes Manufacturing, private property." Kylie squinted at it, tilting her head. "Hayes, sounds familiar. Isn't there a big Hayes Tech or something?" Brandon shrugged. "Probably some dead company from the dinosaur era. Fits his vibe." He rattled the gate experimentally. It groaned in protest before swinging open with a tortured squeal. The sound scraped through the silence, echoing down the long, shadow-streaked driveway like a warning. The group exchanged glances, their bravado flickering for a heartbeat. Then Brandon smirked, brushing it off. "Come on, let's not keep Grandpa waiting." They walked, sneakers grinding over uneven pavement, laughter echoing into the cool dusk. The buildings ahead sharpened into view. Squat warehouses, their corrugated roofs rusted to a dull orange, windows blank with grime. Overhead, power lines drooped like tired ropes against the dying sky. "Man," Jordan muttered, shoving his hands into his hoodie pocket. "If my mom knew I was here, she'd kill me." "Don't be a baby," Brandon shot back. "We're fine. What's he gonna do? Lecture us to death?" But when they rounded the last bend, the laughter stalled. There he was. Victor Hayes stood in the open space before the largest building, his flannel shirt glowing faintly in the golden spill of sunset. Behind him loomed a massive steel door, its surface pocked and scarred from decades of use. A single light bulb flickered above the entrance, casting a pale halo over his weathered face. His boots were planted firmly on the cracked concrete, hands resting loosely at his sides. No smile, no scowl, just that same calm, storm-grey gaze, the one that had unsettled Brandon hours ago without him realizing why. "You came," Victor said, his voice low, steady, carrying just enough weight to slice through the tension pooling in the air. Brandon stepped forward first, flashing his trademark grin. "Of course. Wouldn't miss this little field trip for the world." He swept his arm theatrically toward the warehouses. "Nice setup you've got here. Real vintage." The others snickered. Kylie raised her phone, angling for a shot of the crumbling facade behind Victor. "Guys, this is gold," she whispered. Victor's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to her, his expression unreadable. "Put that away," he said softly. Not loud, not sharp, but something in his tone, like the hush before a storm, made Kylie freeze mid-scroll. She lowered the phone slowly. Victor turned his gaze to Brandon. "You wanted to see what this is about," he said. "Here it is. Opportunity." Brandon arched a brow, smirking again. "And what exactly are we looking at, old man?" Scrap metal paradise? Or do you need someone to sweep up these charming ruins? Victor ignored the jab. Not ruins. A factory. Mine. This is where everything started. He gestured to the yawning steel doors behind him. Every brick, every beam. Built with my own hands when I was younger than you. The teens exchanged skeptical glances. Brandon let out a low whistle. Wow. Touching. So what's the plan? You gonna read us bedtime stories about the good old days? Victor's eyes hardened just enough to draw a line invisible, but undeniable. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of iron and time. No, I'm going to show you something you won't forget. And if you've got half the courage you think you do, you'll step inside. The doors groaned as he dragged them open. Warm, dusty air rolled out like the breath of some slumbering beast. Inside, the cavernous space glimmered with machinery. Hulking silhouettes draped in shadow, conveyor belts coiled like sleeping serpents. The faint metallic scent of grease and steel hanging heavy in the air. Victor stepped across the threshold without looking back. His voice echoed through the dark. Leave your pride at the door. You won't need it where we're going. For the first time that day, Brandon hesitated. Just for a second. The grin faltered. Then he laughed it off, tossing a glance at the others. Come on, he said, forcing lightness into his tone. Let's humor him. And with that, they crossed the line. None of them knew that behind those doors waited a world built on sweat, grit, and truths that money could never buy. By the time the night was over, the kids who mocked a man for his old boots would never laugh the same way again. The steel doors groaned shut behind them with a hollow clang, sealing the twilight outside. Inside, shadows sprawled across a vast space that smelled faintly of oil, metal, and time itself. The factory stretched like a cathedral of industry. Endless rows of hulking machines sleeping under layers of dust, conveyor belts coiled like serpents, steel beams arching overhead like the bones of some long-dead giant. Shafts of dying sunlight knifed through grimy skylights, slicing the darkness into golden ribbons that floated with swirling motes of dust. The teens slowed, their sneakers crunching over concrete stained by decades of labor. Every sound, every scuff, every breath, echoed like footsteps in a tomb. Kylie hugged her designer jacket tighter, her voice a brittle whisper. This place is creepy. Jordan snorted, though his voice lacked conviction. Yeah, creepy like a History Channel episode. Brandon forced a grin, masking the prickle crawling up his spine. Relax. Old guy's just trying to impress us with his abandoned warehouse vibe. Victor walked ahead in silence, boots thudding steadily against the concrete, the sound sharp, commanding. He didn't need to speak. The space spoke for him, walls scarred with years of sweat and fire, ghosts of 1,000 untold stories pressing against the silence. Finally, he stopped near a hulking machine, a press that once bent raw steel into shape. Its iron jaw gaped open, teeth dulled by time, but still carrying an aura of brute power. Victor turned, his storm-grey gaze sweeping over them. You know what this is? Blank stares. A shrug from Brandon. Yeah, a machine? Victor's lips twitched. Not a smile, but something close. Not just a machine. This is where I started. Right here. This floor. These walls. His voice deepened, threading through the cavernous space like smoke. I was 16. No money. No car. No safety net. Just these hands, and 12-hour shifts for $5 an hour. He held up his hands, broad, scarred, knuckles marked by a lifetime of hard labor. Under the dim light, they looked like maps of survival. The teens shifted uncomfortably. The air seemed heavier now, as though the walls themselves absorbed his words and hurled them back like echoes. You laugh at old clothes, Victor said, his tone even, almost soft, but it cut deeper than any shout. At boots worn thin. At a man who doesn't flaunt his worth in chrome and leather. His eyes locked on Brandon, pinning him like a spear. But tell me, how much of what you own did you earn? Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. A flush crept up his neck. Victor didn't wait for an answer. He turned, gesturing toward a long corridor dimly lit by flickering bulbs. Come, there's more you need to see. They followed, their laughter now strangled into silence. Each step carried them deeper into the bowels of the factory, where the smell of oil thickened and the air turned warm, pulsing faintly with the hum of distant machines. Then, without warning, the corridor opened into another space, a stark contrast to the first. Bright lights blazed overhead, bouncing off gleaming steel. The floor was spotless, marked with crisp yellow lines. Modern machines stood like sentinels, sleek and powerful, their chrome surfaces gleaming beneath the fluorescent glare. Men and women in uniform moved with rhythmic precision, the clatter of tools and low hum of engines weaving into a symphony of productivity. The teens froze. This wasn't an abandoned husk. It was alive, thriving. Victor stepped into the glow, his flannel and worn boots almost surreal against the backdrop of high-tech industry. Surprised, his voice carried above the din, calm, almost amused. This is the heart of Hayes Industries, one of 12 plants across the country. We build the engines that power half the machines in this state. Maybe even the car you drove here. Brandon's jaw slackened. He glanced around, eyes wide, pulse thudding. The others stared too. Kylie's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the spotless floor. Victor let the silence work its way under their skin before speaking again. You think wealth is in what you wear, what you drive? No, wealth is built here, where hands bleed, backs ache, and sweat carves futures out of steel. Real value doesn't shout. It whispers quietly behind doors like these. He paused, his gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. But I didn't bring you here for a history lesson. His tone hardened, iron behind velvet. I brought you here for a choice. The teens exchanged wary glances. Brandon finally found his voice, though it cracked on the edges. What kind of choice? Victor's eyes glinted like molten metal. Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp, you come here. You put on a uniform. You work one full shift, 12 hours, side by side with my crew. No phones, no shortcuts, just you and the grind. He let the weight of his words settle like anvils. Do it, and I'll pay each of you more in one day than most people earn in a month. Kylie's eyes widened. How much? Victor raised a calloused finger. Not telling, because if money's the only reason you show up, you've already failed. Brandon scoffed, folding his arms to mask the flicker of unease behind his grin. So what? You're trying to teach us a lesson, old man? Make us feel sorry for the working class. Victor's voice dropped an octave, calm as still water, but with the pull of a riptide beneath. No, I'm trying to see if any of you are strong enough to earn the respect you throw away so easily. The words landed heavy. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of machines and the distant clang of steel. Then Victor turned toward a glass-paneled door leading to an office that overlooked the factory floor. Through it, the teens caught a glimpse of something that made their breath hitch. A sleek black car gleaming under soft white lights. Curves sharp as a blade. A brand so rare it was whispered like a prayer in luxury circles. The Aquila V12 hypercar. Price tag? $3 million, if you could even get on the waiting list. Victor's eyes followed theirs, a faint smile ghosting his lips. That's mine. Paid for in cash. He faced them fully now, his voice cutting like steel on steel. Still think old clothes make a poor man? The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the first fracture in their arrogance. The factory floor was a different world at dawn. At precisely 5:50 a.m., the eastern horizon barely bruised with light, Victor's black pickup rumbled through the gates. Behind it, the Lamborghini slithered in like an exotic predator caged in foreign territory. Its glossy curves looked absurd under the skeletal cranes and steel girders looming against the pale morning sky. Inside the car, Brandon stifled a yawn, tossing a glance at the others. Kylie clung to a paper cup of coffee like it was oxygen, mascara smudged under her eyes. Jordan scrolled half-heartedly through his phone, thumbs sluggish, the screen casting a ghostly glow over his tired face. This is insane, Kylie muttered, rubbing her arms against the chill. 6 a.m? I don't even wake up until 10 on weekends. Brandon smirked, masking the fatigue pooling behind his lids. Chill. It's one day. We play along, grab the cash, and post a killer story about it. People are gonna eat this up. He believed it, or tried to. Anything to drown out the whisper of unease curling in his gut since last night. Victor was waiting by the entrance, clad in the same flannel and boots, hands folded loosely behind his back. His expression betrayed nothing. No smugness, no impatience. Just the calm certainty of a man who'd seen every kind of storm and never bowed to any. You're early, he said simply as the teens filed out, their designer sneakers crunching against gravel. Good. That means you care about rules, at least when money's involved. Brandon rolled his shoulders, forcing nonchalance. Yeah. So where's this big challenge? Let's get it over with. Victor's eyes flicked over them, pausing for a beat on Kylie's diamond-studded nails, then on Jordan's spotless sneakers. Follow me. They stepped into the belly of the factory, and this time, the scene hit different. Yesterday it had been intimidating, an ocean of machines, metal, and motion. Today, it roared to life like a beast. Engines thrummed in synchronized rhythm. Sparks spat from welding torches, their bright flares biting at the dimness. Steel sheets screeched against rollers. Voices rose and fell in sharp commands, drowned at intervals by the deafening clatter of presses hammering molten wool into shape. The smell hit them next, a heady cocktail of oil, grease, sweat, and metal hot enough to sting the back of the throat. The air vibrated with raw energy, heavy with the pulse of a world that didn't care for fragile egos or manicured nails. Kylie gagged softly behind her palm. God, it smells like burnt pennies and socks. Victor heard her, but didn't comment. He kept walking until they reached a row of lockers. Inside each hung a grey uniform, stiff and plain, with names embroidered above the breast pocket. "Suit up," he said, his voice slicing through the din. Phones in the lockbox. "No photos. No exceptions." Brandon blinked. "Wait, you're serious? We can't even." Victor's gaze snapped to his like a trigger being cocked. "You came for an experience, not an audience." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Reluctantly, Brandon unclipped his phone from his jeans, fingers lingering on the sleek screen like a lover he didn't want to leave. One by one, the others surrendered theirs, the metallic clink of each device echoing like nails sealing a coffin on their comfort. Victor nodded toward the lockers. 10 minutes. Move. They emerged from the changing room, stripped of their glitter. The grey coveralls hung awkwardly on their frames, masking designer labels and Instagram-worthy fits under a shroud of anonymity. Kylie tugged at the stiff collar with visible disgust. Brandon laughed under his breath, though the sound rang hollow. "Damn, we look like extras in some prison movie." Victor's voice came from behind, dry as sandpaper. "Prison? No. Freedom. The kind you earn, not the kind you flaunt." Before they could reply, a foreman appeared. A burly man named Miguel, his face weathered by years of heat and steel, eyes sharp under the brim of his cap. He gave the teens one sweeping look that stripped them bare of whatever pride lingered. "These your rookies?" he asked Victor, voice like gravel in a tin can. Victor nodded. "One shift. Don't go easy on them." Miguel's grin was slow and merciless. "Don't worry. They'll learn." And so the day began. First came the heat. It hit like a punch the moment they stepped near the furnaces, thick, blistering waves that slicked their skin in sweat within minutes. Then the weight, crates of steel parts that didn't care for manicures or soft palms, that dug into shoulders and strained muscles they didn't know existed. Jordan lasted 7 minutes before groaning. "Yo, this is insane. These boxes weigh a ton." "Welcome to Tuesday," Miguel shot back, tossing another piece of raw steel onto a rack with a casual strength that made Jordan feel like tissue paper. Kylie tried to keep up at first, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts as she wiped sweat that smeared her foundation into streaks. Her nails, once Instagram perfect, snapped one by one as she fumbled with bolts that fought back like stubborn beasts. Brandon kept his grin plastered on, but it cracked under the relentless grind. The roar of machines swallowed his jokes. His arms burned. His back screamed. Sweat drenched his shirt until it clung like a second skin. Every minute stretched into an hour, every task a mountain. By noon, the Lamborghini kids had traded smirks for silence. By 2, silence had turned to grim determination. The kind born when pride runs dry, and only raw will keeps your feet moving. Victor watched from the mezzanine above, arms folded, eyes hooded. He didn't gloat, didn't sneer. He simply waited, like a storm biding its time. Because the real lesson wasn't in the weight they carried on their backs. It was in the weight they'd feel in their souls when the day was done. As the clock crawled toward evening, Brandon collapsed onto a bench in the break area, his hands trembling, face grey with exhaustion. Sweat dripped from his jaw like rain off a gutter. He looked up and froze. Victor stood before him, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbow, his own forearms corded with muscle earned long before the teens were born. In his hand, he held a bottle of water. "Thirsty?" Victor asked, his voice unreadable. Brandon swallowed, then nodded. Wordless, he took the bottle, gulping like a man starved of rain. Victor watched him for a long beat before speaking, his tone soft but sharp as a blade sliding free of its sheath. "How does it feel, Brandon? Wearing skin that doesn't come with applause? Standing where respect isn't bought with keys or clothes, but earned in blisters and grit?" Brandon stared at him, chest heaving. For the first time, no smart remark came. No grin, just silence, and something raw flickering behind his eyes. Victor leaned in slightly, his words low, meant for Brandon alone. "Welcome to the real world, son, where character, not chrome, defines a man." By mid-afternoon, The factory's heartbeat had become a relentless drumbeat in the teens' skulls. Every clang of metal was a hammer pounding away at their pride. The first to falter was Jordan. His breath soared in and out as he staggered under the weight of a crate stacked with steel rods. His arms quivered, sweat dripping from his brow, stinging his eyes. With a grunt, he dropped the load onto the concrete. Too hard. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Miguel spun, his glare sharp enough to slice through steel. You trying to shatter the floor, rookie? Or just my patience? Jordan flinched, wiping his face with his sleeve. Man, this is brutal. How do people do this every day? Miguel stepped closer, voice like gravel rolling in a storm. They do it because they have no choice. Because this, he jabbed a finger toward the towering stacks of steel, puts food on their table, pays for medicine, keeps the lights on. You've got soft hands and softer guts. You wouldn't last a week here. Jordan looked down, shame burning hotter than the furnace heat. Brandon, watching from a few feet away, clenched his jaw. His own muscles screamed with every lift, every turn. His palms were raw, streaked with angry red lines that would blister by nightfall. He wanted to quit. God, he wanted to. But quitting meant Victor would win. And Brandon Pierce didn't lose. Yo, Jordan, he barked, voice hoarse. Come on, man. We're not dying here. It's just work. Jordan shot him a look. Easy for you to say, Mr. Motivational Speaker. You've been lifting half what I have. Because you don't know what you're doing, Brandon snapped, then regretted it when Jordan's face hardened like set concrete. Kylie broke the tension with a strangled groan. She sat slumped against a wall, hair plastered to her forehead, mascara melted into dark streaks. Her nails, once glittering trophies, were now jagged stubs, edges rimmed with grime. This is disgusting, she gasped, clutching her stomach. I can't even feel my arms. Why does anyone live like this? Victor's voice slid into the moment like a cold blade. Because they have courage. Because they don't give up when life stinks of sweat and metal. Because they understand something you don't. The teens turned, and there he was, hands tucked into his pockets, boots dusted with grit, flannel sleeves rolled high. His calm carved through their chaos like a silent tide. What's that supposed to mean? Brandon growled, forcing steel into his tone even as fatigue chewed at his edges. Victor stepped closer, his gaze locking onto Brandon with surgical precision. It means real strength isn't in running when things get hard, or laughing at what you don't understand. It's standing your ground when every muscle screams, when your pride wants out. That's when character's born. Brandon's chest heaved. The words burned like acid, because somewhere deep inside, he knew they were true. The shift ground on, hour by punishing hour. They carried. They bolted. They scrubbed grease from parts until their fingers cramped. Miguel's voice cracked like a whip, barking orders drowned by the roar of machinery. By 6 p.m., the teens were unrecognizable. Coveralls streaked with oil. Hands swollen and tender. Faces hollowed by exhaustion. Not one of them dared check a phone. They couldn't if they wanted to. Their manicured, polished world had been stripped bare, replaced by raw reality and the gnawing truth of how soft they'd been. As the final siren blared, long, low, and merciful, Brandon dropped onto a bench in the break room, head in his hands. His chest heaved like a bellows. Sweat dripped from his jaw onto the concrete. He didn't even care anymore about appearances. Pride had burned away hours ago, leaving only something raw and unfamiliar. Victor appeared in the doorway, silent as a shadow. In his hands, a small metal tray bearing 4 mugs of steaming coffee. He set it down without a word, then leaned against the wall, arms folded. No lectures, no gloating, just waiting. The silence stretched until Brandon couldn't take it. He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, voice scraping like sandpaper. You wanted to prove something, right? That we're weak? That we're spoiled? Victor's gaze was steady, his voice low and even. No, Brandon. I wanted you to feel something. The weight of real work. The value of what you've been mocking all your life. Brandon's throat bobbed. For the first time, his voice cracked. I didn't know it was like this. He swallowed hard, glancing at his raw hands. I thought this was easy. For people who didn't try. Victor stepped forward, his boots whispering over the concrete. He crouched so his eyes met Brandon's on level ground. You've spent your life judging struggle from a leather seat, he said softly. But struggle is the forge. It breaks some, makes others unbreakable. Wealth doesn't define you. Hardship does. Brandon stared at him, something burning behind his exhaustion. Shame, yes, but also the first ember of understanding. For the first time all day, Victor allowed himself a faint smile. "Shift's over," he said, rising. "Go clean up. Dinner's waiting." Kylie lifted her head, blinking. "Dinner?" Victor nodded toward a glass-paneled stairway leading to an upper level. Beyond it, warm light spilled like honey, golden and inviting. "Up there. My office." The teens exchanged looks, confusion warring with bone-deep fatigue. Brandon stood on trembling legs, one hand gripping the edge of the bench for balance. Victor turned toward the stairs without another word, his voice drifting back over his shoulder like a promise and a warning. "Tonight, you'll see what wealth really looks like." The stairway rose like a bridge between two worlds, one reeking of sweat and metal, the other glowing with a promise they couldn't name yet. Each step groaned under the teens' exhausted weight, their grey uniforms clinging damp and filthy to their skin. Brandon's legs shook with every climb, his breath dragging like a rusted chain. Behind him, Kylie staggered, clutching the railing with chipped nails, her designer confidence dissolved into silence. Jordan limped along, shoulders slumped, his earlier bravado ground down to nothing but fatigue. At the top, a door of frosted glass slid open with a soft hiss. Warm light spilled out, washing over them in a golden glow that felt almost unreal after 12 hours of grit and darkness. They stepped inside and froze. The office was nothing like they imagined. It wasn't just an office. It was a world apart. Walls paneled in dark mahogany rose toward a ceiling laced with subtle gold inlays. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the city bathed in twilight, its skyline blazing like a constellation brought to Earth. A crystal chandelier floated above a dining table carved from a single slab of black walnut, its surface gleaming like still water. At its center, a spread of dishes steamed in silver chafers, roast tenderloin glistening under warm lights, a cascade of fresh greens, fruits sliced like jewels, glasses sparkling with amber liquid. And there, in the far corner, beneath a soft spotlight, sat a car. Not just any car. The Aquila V12 hypercar gleamed like a living thing, its curves predatory, its carbon fiber skin catching every fragment of light and breaking it into liquid silver. The logo, an intricate pair of wings, glowed faintly against the hood. Price tag? $3 million. Waiting list? 2 years. Unless, of course, you were the man who owned the building it sat in. The teen stared slack-jawed. Brandon's throat went dry. The car alone was worth more than every car he'd ever seen in his gated neighborhood combined. And then their gaze shifted, slowly, almost unwillingly, to the man who owned it all. Victor Hayes stood near the window, no longer the invisible figure in worn flannel and scuffed boots. He hadn't changed clothes, hadn't donned a suit or polished his image. He didn't need to. Power radiated from him. Not loud, not gaudy, but in the way his presence filled the room like gravity itself. "Sit," he said simply, his voice smooth, commanding without strain. They obeyed without a word. For a long moment, silence ruled. Only the soft hum of the city below and the muted clink of silverware as Victor lifted a carafe and poured water into crystal glasses. Then, finally, Brandon found his voice, rough and uneven. This is yours?" Victor's eyes met his, calm as a still lake. "Every inch of it. The factory, the patents, the distribution network. 12 plants across the country. I built it from nothing." Kylie's lips parted, but no sound came. Her gaze flicked back to the car, then to Victor, then down at her raw, grime-streaked hands. You're like," Jordan's voice cracked. "You're a billionaire?" Victor gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Numbers don't matter. Not here. What matters is what you do to earn them." Brandon swallowed hard, heat crawling up his neck. His mind scrambled for something, anything, to say, but the words clung like wet clothes to his throat. Victor set the carafe down with a muted thud. "You mocked me because of my clothes. My truck. You thought wealth was what glitters." His voice deepened, carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through bone. But true wealth is silent. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need validation, because it knows what it is, and where it came from. He stepped closer, his boots whispering over the Persian rug. His gaze swept over them, pinning each one to their seat. "You think power is in the car you drive? The labels on your back? No." His voice dropped lower, soft but magnetic, every word a hook. "Power is in building something no one can take from you. In earning respect that isn't bought, but forged, hour by hour, sacrifice by sacrifice." The teen sat rigid, eyes wide, throats tight. Victor's tone softened, not with pity, but with truth. "I brought you here because I wanted you to feel it, the weight of work, the sting of humility. Not to break you, but to show you that arrogance is the rust that eats away at potential. And you have potential, but only if you learn that character matters more than chrome. He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the silence. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached into his back pocket and withdrew 4 envelopes, setting them down on the table one by one. "Inside," he said, "is your pay for the day. What most of my men earn in a week, you earned in 12 hours. But the real payment." His eyes gleamed like stormlight. "That's in here." He tapped his temple. "If you're smart enough to use it." Brandon stared at the envelope in front of him like it weighed 100 pounds. His throat worked, but no words came. For the first time in his life, money didn't feel like victory. Victor straightened, his silhouette framed by the city lights beyond the glass. "Eat," he said quietly. "You'll need your strength. Because after tonight," he let the words trail off, a faint, knowing smile ghosting his lips, "life won't look the same to you again." Dinner unfolded in silence at first, a silence heavy enough to crush words before they were born. Crystal glasses clinked softly, silverware whispered against porcelain, but the teens barely tasted the food before them. The roast beef was tender, melting under the knife. The greens were crisp, jeweled with drops of citrus vinaigrette. Steam curled lazily from golden bowls of soup rich enough to perfume the room. And yet, for the first time in their lives, these kids didn't care about the menu, because hunger gnawed at something deeper than their stomachs. Brandon sat rigid, elbows on his knees, staring at the linen-draped table without really seeing it. The fatigue from 12 brutal hours clung to his bones, but it wasn't just exhaustion slowing his breath. It was something heavier, something like shame. He looked down at his hands. Raw, red. A thin blister had bubbled on his palm, skin puckered and angry. This morning, those hands had clutched a steering wheel stitched in Italian leather. Tonight, they looked like they belonged to someone else. Someone who knew what survival really cost. For the first time, Brandon wondered what it would feel like to wake up tomorrow and do it all again. Not for a challenge, not for a bet, but because your family depended on it. Across from him, Kylie sat with her chin in her hands, eyes glassy as they skimmed the glittering skyline beyond the windows. She'd stopped fussing with her hair hours ago. The remnants of her makeup painted her cheeks in streaks of defeat. A broken nail caught on the edge of the tablecloth, and she didn't even flinch. Jordan slumped in his chair, his broad shoulders sagging like wet canvas. Every muscle in his body ached, but something else burned deeper, humiliation. He thought of his father, a man who had built a small plumbing business from nothing, who had spent years bent over leaking pipes so his son could have a life free of calluses. He had laughed at that struggle, brushed it off as old school. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight his father had carried all along. The room was warm, but none of them felt comforted. Victor broke the silence at last. Not with a lecture, but with a question. "Tell me," he said quietly, his voice smooth as polished steel. "What did today teach you?" No one spoke. The hum of the city beyond the glass seemed louder than their own breathing. Finally, Brandon swallowed hard. His voice came low, roughened by fatigue and something he couldn't name. "That. I didn't know anything," he said, staring at his blistered hands. "About work. About what it takes. I thought being rich was about things. Cars. Clothes. All that." His voice cracked like dry wood. "But none of that means anything if you can't earn it." Victor's gaze held him steady, grey eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Go on." Brandon hesitated, then forced the words out, each one scraping his pride raw. "I was wrong about you. About everything. I laughed because I thought I was better. But I was just scared that without all this," he gestured vaguely, meaning the wealth, the noise, the image, "I'd be nothing." Victor leaned forward, forearms resting on the table, his voice low but resonant. "And now," Brandon met his eyes. His own burned. "Now I think, maybe being nothing isn't about what you have. Maybe it's about never learning who you are without it." A faint smile curved Victor's mouth, just enough to flicker like a shadow of approval. He turned to the others. "And you?" Kylie's voice trembled when she spoke. I complained about everything today. The heat, the smell, the dirt." Tears shimmered along her lashes, catching the soft light. "But those people, your workers, they smiled through all of it. They joked. They kept going. I couldn't last an hour without wanting to quit." She shook her head, wiping her cheek with the heel of her hand. "I thought that made them less. Now I know, they're stronger than I've ever been." Jordan said nothing for a long time, jaw clenched tight. Then finally, he whispered, "My dad works with his hands. Built his whole life that way." I laughed at that. Thought I was better. But today, I couldn't even keep up. If he were here, his voice broke, I'd tell him I'm proud. And I'm sorry. Victor let the silence that followed bloom like dawn breaking over steel. Then he rose slowly, his presence towering though his voice remained soft. Strength, he said, moving toward the window where the city sprawled like a map of fire and glass, isn't in what you show the world. It's in what you endure when no one's watching. True wealth isn't in the car you drive or the brand on your shirt. It's in what you build and who you become in the process. He turned, eyes sweeping over their exhausted faces. You learned more in 12 hours than you have in years. Hold on to it, or you'll lose yourselves before life even begins. The teens sat frozen, his words anchoring deep in their bones. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with meaning, with the slow churn of change. Victor walked back to the table, picked up the envelopes, and slid them across the polished wood, one to each. Your pay, he said simply. Enough to make you smile. But don't. If you do, then everything you felt today was wasted. Brandon stared at the envelope like it held something dangerous. His fingers hovered, then curled around it, trembling. Victor straightened, his boots whispering over the rug as he moved toward the glass doors that opened onto a balcony. Beyond them, the city glowed under a velvet sky, 1,000 lights winking like silent witnesses to the lesson carved into this night. Before stepping outside, Victor spoke one last time, his voice low, deliberate, final. Tomorrow, you'll wake up sore. Maybe you'll post pictures of this dinner. Maybe you'll forget every word I said. He paused, gaze cutting back to them like a blade glinting in moonlight. But if you remember one thing, let it be this. Money without humility is poverty in disguise. With that, he stepped out onto the balcony, the night swallowing him in a hush of wind and distant sirens. Inside, 4 teenagers sat in a room that had turned into a mirror, one that showed them not who they had been, but who they could be if they dared. The night air hit them like a cool tide as they stepped out of Victor's fortress of glass and steel. The city sprawled below, pulsing with neon veins, alive with a rhythm that felt distant, like another planet compared to the world they had inhabited for the last 12 hours. Brandon led the way down the polished steps, his envelope tucked into his pocket like contraband. Kylie followed, her heels dangling from her fingers, bare feet padding silently over stone. Jordan trailed behind, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the ground as though afraid to look up and see the weight of his own ignorance staring back from the stars. Victor didn't come to the door. He didn't wave goodbye. He didn't need to. His presence lingered in their bones like the ache in their muscles, a reminder that would outlast any words. The parking area stretched before them, bathed in the glow of motion sensor lights. Brandon's Lamborghini sat gleaming like a neon promise, a promise that suddenly felt hollow. He slowed, staring at the car, its curves sharp as a blade, its paint whispering wealth in every reflection. Yesterday, it had been his crown. Tonight, it looked like a mask. Jordan broke the silence first, his voice low. You think he meant all that? About humility? Brandon didn't answer right away. He ran a hand over the car's hood, fingers tracing the sleek surface. Once, this had felt like power. Now it felt like plastic. Yeah, he said finally, his voice rough. I think he meant every damn word. Kylie sank onto the curb, resting her chin on her knees. I thought money was the point, she whispered. That, if you had enough, you mattered. But he doesn't even care. He doesn't need to. Brandon glanced at her, then at Jordan, then back at the glowing tower behind them, where Victor still moved like a ghost in the windows. He doesn't need to, he echoed softly, because he knows who he is without it. The truth hung there, stark and undeniable. They climbed into the car without another word. The engine roared to life, a sound that once thrilled Brandon, but now felt like an echo of something shallow. The Lamborghini slid onto the highway, its headlights slicing through the darkness as the city blurred past. Inside the cabin, silence settled again, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of old. It was a silence that asked questions. Questions none of them had answers to. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I'm selling it, he said. Jordan turned, eyes wide. What? This car, Brandon murmured, tightening his grip on the wheel. I'm selling it. Not because I need the money. Because I need to know who I am without it. Kylie stared at him, speechless. Then, slowly, a tear slid down her cheek. Not for the car, but for the version of herself she had just left behind in that factory. As the city lights thinned and the highway stretched into the dark, a single thought burned in Brandon's mind. Power isn't loud. Real strength doesn't need an audience. He didn't know where this road would lead. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid to find out. Victor watched from the balcony, a silhouette against the night. He saw the Lamborghini's taillights fade into the distance, a faint smile curling his lips, not of triumph, but of quiet hope. Some lessons take root slowly. Others, like tonight, split the earth and rewrite the map of a life. He turned, stepping back into the warmth of his empire, his voice a whisper only the stars heard. Chrome fades. Character doesn't. The screen fades to black as the narrator's voice, steady, deep, magnetic, slides into the silence. They walked away changed. But what about you? If everything you own vanished tomorrow, if the world stripped away your clothes, your car, your titles, what would be left? Who would you be when wealth is no longer your shield? Think about it. Because one day, life might just ask you the same question.